As Catherine of Aragon's body was prepared for burial, it was noted that her corpse appeared to be healthy, save for her heart, which had turned completely black. This mystery, which we will unravel, is only one of the ways Catherine of Aragon may be the most misunderstood of King Henry VIII's wives. There was a chilling darkness to this royal figure. And although Catherine's successor, Queen Anne Boleyn, suffered an infamously dark fate, Catherine's own life was somehow even more tragic. For all that Catherine was doomed to tragedy, her childhood was charmed. Her mother and father were no less than King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, a royal power couple of the time. The pair gave their daughter lessons in cunning, courting, and statecraft. And she would need all of these skills to survive King Henry VIII. From a young age, it was clear that Catherine was going to be beautiful. She had long auburn hair, bright blue eyes, and a cherubic face. People actually called her the most beautiful creature in the world. And one courtier noted, there were few women who could compete with the queen in her prime. Once that prime ended, though, it was quite a different story. But that wasn't for a while yet. Catherine's path to King Henry VIII was almost as dramatic as her actual marriage to him. For one, she started out betrothed to his brother, not to him. Her ambitious parents arranged her engagement to Henry's older sibling, Prince Arthur, the heir to England, when she was still just a toddler. Prince Arthur and the Spanish princess officially married on November 14th, 1501, in a stately, lavish ceremony that fit their ranks as royals. Little did they know, immense upheaval was just around the corner. Catherine and Arthur posted up near Wales to while away their teenaged honeymoon. Mere months later, their celebration turned to terror. The fatal sweating sickness was ravaging the area at the time, and they both fell desperately ill. Bedridden and delirious, Catherine spent the next days fighting for her life. When she pulled through, it was an absolute miracle. Yet the young princess did not come out unscathed. Though she survived, she awoke to find that her young husband had not. At 16 years old, Catherine was a widow, and this was dangerous in more ways than one. The minute she became Arthur's widow, Catherine's position was incredibly precarious. Her father-in-law, King Henry VII, was anxious to keep her dowry dollars, and sending her back to Spain meant giving a full refund. What he suggested next was utterly chilling. The 45-year-old monarch wanted to marry Catherine himself. Eventually, Catherine's parents protested so much about a creepy old man marrying their teen daughter that the king relented. His replacement suitor became his younger son, the future King Henry VIII. Unfortunately, Catherine's troubles were just beginning. Their marriage was delayed, partly because Catherine was 5 years older than the growing Henry, but also because her stingy father was extremely slow in handing over the rest of her dowry. In the meantime, Catherine sat waiting in London, enduring nearly penniless years and drafty homes. She could barely afford to pay her servants. But she never, ever gave up her purpose of marrying Henry and becoming Queen of England. This single-mindedness is exactly what would get her into a world of trouble later on. But this limbo wasn't the only thing she had to worry about. Catherine's marriage to Henry was actually unimaginably scandalous for the time. Because she had already been married to his brother, they had to get special dispensation from the Pope for the union, since it was technically against the teachings in the Bible. Even then, the royals only got a reluctant papal go-ahead, and only after Catherine made an extremely controversial confession. Henry and Catherine's petition to the Pope hinged on a single claim: Catherine's assurance that she and Arthur had never consummated their union. As they were both scrawny, nervous teenagers who spent more time fighting the sweating sickness than they did spending time together, this may very well be true. Either way, it would still come back to bite her. When Henry finally did marry Catherine after 7 long years of waiting, he was already king, turning her at long last into the Queen Consort of England. To add to all this, Henry was also considered quite the catch. He was a strapping, auburn-haired athlete who loved hunting as much as he loved his humanist education. What could go wrong? The answer to that is a lot, and immediately. Catherine soon got pregnant, but suffered through miscarriages and problem pregnancies. Meanwhile, Henry began taking up with mistresses. When she did give birth to a baby boy in early 1511, he died soon after. By now, Henry was already antsy for that male heir he infamously wanted. And yes, this was partly because he valued boys more than girls, but there's another side to this that people sometimes forget. The one crucial thing to understand about the Tudor line that Henry belonged to is that it was on shaky ground. It had come out of the Wars of the Roses with a weak claim to the throne. Henry was also searching for a way to strengthen that claim to the throne with a legitimate male heir. And he put immense pressure on Catherine to do this for him. However, Catherine was also proving she was not a woman to be messed with. Despite the ravages of their personal life, Henry gave Catherine almost unprecedented political power around this time, making her his regent in 1513 while he went to France on campaign. This wasn't a rubber stamp either. Though Henry was fighting on one border, Catherine quickly found herself alone and defending England against a different enemy. While Henry was away in France, Scotland saw an opening and started invading England, assuming Catherine of Aragon was a weak woman and ruler. She was not. Catherine helped raise armies, made banners, and marshaled allies. Then, in September 1513, she famously rode north in complete armor and regalia and gave an inspirational speech to her men, showing them what a queen she was. And that's not the best part. At the moment Catherine went full-on warrior queen on her enemies, she was actually 7 months pregnant. And that wasn't all. Catherine sent her husband Henry the torn, bloody coat of King James IV of Scotland, who had perished in the battle with her men. In fact, Catherine originally wanted to send Henry much more than a coat tail. The torn coat was just a consolation prize, since Catherine realized that Englishmen were too weak-bellied to handle it. That was her exact word. Yet Catherine paid a high price for her valor. Perhaps fueled by all the stresses she was under, Catherine went into premature labor again on September 17, 1513, just days after rallying her men. It was another boy, and it was a stillbirth. Then next year, the same unbearable tragedy happened again. When Catherine finally did bring a healthy baby to term in 1516, it was a girl, the future Queen Mary. Henry was dejected at the thought that after a string of stillborn sons, he now had a healthy daughter to feed. He even consoled Catherine by saying that since this one was a girl, it meant a better chance for a boy next time. No, Henry didn't understand the basic laws of probability, but he also didn't understand basic human decency either. Around this time, Henry had been seeing yet another mistress, Bessie Blount. Blount even gave birth to a healthy boy, Henry's illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, proving to the king that it wasn't his fault he had no legitimate sons, but that the blame lay with Catherine. In short, the tables were turning. Catherine's final pregnancy happened in 1518, and it was absolutely devastating. By now, the queen was in a frenzy for a living son, even making a pilgrimage to a shrine to beg God for a healthy boy. It was not to be. She gave birth to a fragile daughter who only lived a few hours. Some say that at this point, Catherine's fate was sealed. When the 1520s rolled around with no male heir in sight, Henry and Catherine's relationship was fraying at the edges. And the worst thing possible happened. The now infamous Anne Boleyn became her lady-in-waiting. Boleyn was a double threat to Catherine's crown. First, the bewitchingly beautiful Anne refused to sleep with Henry without a ring. But there was something even more sinister. Catherine was now past her childbearing years and had lost her famous beauty, whereas the captivating Anne was 11 years younger than Henry, and he still desperately wanted that heir. As we know now, he'd stop at nothing to get it. And I really mean nothing. He began looking for a way out. When Catherine found out about this, she was aghast. She knew she was the rightful Queen of England. She'd ridden pregnant into Scotland, for God's sake. And she was incensed at her husband's tomfoolery. She also swore, literally to her dying day, that she had truly never consummated her union with Prince Arthur. So when Henry tried to convince her to go into a convent and quietly disappear so he could marry Anne, Catherine reportedly snapped, "God never called me to a nunnery." Thus, from Henry's desperation and Catherine's strong will, the king's great matter was born. Henry's quest to split from Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn went on for years, as he tried to get the church to let him bed Anne under the approving eye of God. Catherine continued to not go gently. In one iconic moment, Catherine of Aragon knelt before Henry in front of what was essentially a council for her demise. She told him, in broken English, just what he was doing to her. In front of his impassive face, she insisted she was his true wife and queen. Today, everyone knows this ended in revolution, with Henry taking over as head of the church, ending his own marriage, making Anne Boleyn his queen, and kickstarting the English Reformation in the process. Yet the personal toll this took on Catherine has been mostly hidden from history. In July 1531, for example, Henry left Catherine on a hunting trip and never came back, all but abandoning her. He then banished Catherine from his court, installed Boleyn in her old rooms, and refused to let her see her daughter Mary. It didn't matter that Catherine had public opinion on her side and Anne was near universally reviled. She was out of the throne room. For the next 4 years, Catherine moved from castle to castle on the outskirts of English society, and her habits grew more and more disturbing. By the time she was at Kimbolton Castle, Catherine imprisoned herself in one room of the house, leaving it only to attend Mass and denying herself almost all sustenance. The once and former queen also took to wearing a hair shirt, a coarse and uncomfortable garment that was meant to mortify the flesh, tormenting the wearer, irritating their skin, and promoting repentance. Though as for what she was repenting for, your guess is as good as mine. Catherine later said of these trials, "It is enough to shorten 10 lives, much more mine." All the while, Henry wrote nagging missives to her, wheedling or whining at her to recognize Anne Boleyn as the true Queen of England, especially once they were married in 1533. Well, Catherine did not. Despite the pressure against her, she never stopped referring to herself as the true Queen of England. She also demanded that her servants do the same, addressing her with all the glory of her rightful rank. Henry, however, came up with more disrespectful names for her. After denying her the crown, Henry sealed the deal by insisting on calling Catherine the Dowager Princess of Wales. And while that sounds respectful, it gets a whole lot more insulting once you realize that this title pointedly turns her into merely Prince Arthur's widow and makes no reference to her previous title of queen. This all took a toll. In less than 10 years' time, Catherine had staggered through a lifetime of pain, and her health was never the same after the initial shock of Henry's annulment proposal. By 1535, she felt herself growing weaker and weaker with a strange malady. Knowing the end was near, she reportedly penned a last letter to her husband, and its contents were soul-crushing. Her reported final letter to Henry functions as a last will and testament, an accusation, and an absolution, all in one. In it, she forces him to remember his wrongs toward her, but also writes, "For my part, I pardon you everything. And I wish to devoutly pray God that He will pardon you also." She'd signed it, Catherine the Queen. On January 7th, 1536, Catherine passed at Kimbolton Castle after this rapid and, for the time being, bizarre illness. King Henry and Anne Boleyn dressed up in possibly celebratory yellow, though this also may have been a nod to the Spanish color of mourning. Then, on the day of Catherine's funeral, which was not fit for a Queen of England but for a mere dowager, Anne Boleyn miscarried. In a tragic irony to end all tragic ironies, that stillbirth also ended up being a baby boy. And that was not the only way that Catherine haunted the king and queen from beyond the grave. As mentioned, while preparing Catherine's body for burial, her embalmer saw that the corpse was in perfect health, except that her heart had turned black. It instantly set off dark rumors that Henry and Anne had Catherine poisoned to get her out of their way. Especially since Anne had actually already been linked to poison plots before. Modern historians, however, believe a much different story. Most experts today believe that rather than foul play, Catherine died from cancer of the heart. It can sometimes turn the heart black. Nonetheless, it's still tragically poetic, given the circumstances of Catherine's life and her queenship. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and watch our channel for more stories about history's most fascinating figures.